Cloudcast Media.
Drew Schlosberg Spotlight on the Community Show, amplifying the voices of social impact organizations, entrepreneurs, local nonprofits, and other community champions who shape the culture, creativity, and connectivity of San Diego. Brought to you by Mission Fed Credit Union, bringing good things to San Diego for over 60 years. Learn more about what is good for you and good for all by visiting www.missionfed.com.
I'm Drew Schlosberg with Cloudcast Media. You'll be listening to another edition of Drew Schlosberg Spotlight on the Community Show. We are the nation's longest-running community podcast in our 20th year, brought to you by Mission Fed Credit Union. 6 decades of doing great things for people living in San Diego County, whether it's food insecurity, Alzheimer's, the homeless, arts. They're involved in so many great causes. Honored to have in the studio with us today Kim Berry-Jones. She is the president of the Kinship Fund. How you doing there, Kim?
Great. So glad to be here this morning.
Well, we're happy to have you and honored to have as my co-host. He pops in and out of the studio every once in a while, and always great to have him sitting in the co-pilot seat over there, and that's Nick Rennell, adjunct faculty at American Military University. How you doing there, Nick?
Doing great. Glad to be back here, Drew.
Absolutely. We got a dual role for you. You'll be doing some co-hosting, and then we're actually going to get you on the other side of the mic later.
Yeah, that's going to be a fun change of pace for me.
Absolutely. Why don't you get us kicked off with a question to Kim?
Kim, tell us more about what the mission of the Kinship Fund is.
So the Kinship Fund has a mission to support the resiliency and well-being of women and girls in San Diego. Although our reach is further than just women and girls, that is our core mission.
That's amazing. So how do you do that?
So the way it has landed for us is actually focusing on 2 different projects. So we decided to combine our efforts to help our nonprofit partners collaborate together. And so we have a project based out in El Cajon that's a place-based project, and it supports primarily refugees and immigrants through the support of multiple nonprofits that all work out of the same physical space. And then our second project is focusing on youth mentorship. So we support 9 nonprofit organizations, all that work with youth around the idea of mentorship, from full continuum to organizations that work on the prevention side all the way down to the intervention side, where organizations are working with justice-impacted youth.
So 2021 is when you founded the Kinship Fund. What motivated you to do this? Why?
Well, it's quite an interesting, crazy story.
I want to hear it.
Yeah.
So does Nick.
We had a friend and neighbor, was a neighbor who became a friend and eventually became family. And her name was Nancy. She was a very, very bright but eccentric woman who lived across the street from us. And we first met her when we were newlyweds back in 1994. And over the years, as we had kids and grew in that home and raised our family in that home, she became the neighbor that showed up all the time and eventually became family. And so she got ill in the summer of 2021. And when we found out she was diagnosed with cancer, she ended up moving into our home. There was really no...
Was she living by herself?
She did. She had always lived by herself, never married, never had kids, but she was a hoarder.
Oh, boy.
So we were aware of that. Although we'd never been inside her home, we were very aware of that. And we knew after her diagnosis that there was no way she could care for herself in her home. And so my husband, Chris, and I took her in, and she lived with us and ended up being for the last 6 weeks of her life. So she got a diagnosis of cancer and then was gone within 6 weeks.
Wow.
But the 2 weeks before she passed away, I was with her in the hospital trying to work. And I got a call from a reporter at the Business Journal. I was leading a nonprofit that focused on anti-human trafficking. So I'm a subject matter expert and got this call, and I took the call in her room. And after I hung up on the call, she looked at me and she said, "Gosh, I didn't know you were so smart." And I thought, well, that's a Nancy phrase if there's anything. And I just kind of thought, oh, okay, well, great. That's a compliment, I guess. And so a couple of hours later, I had gone and done a meeting and come back to the hospital. She told me to sit down, that she had something to tell me. And she had decided there that she wanted me to start a foundation. And at this point, this was the first realization I had that Nancy had money. She didn't live like she did. We really didn't know a whole lot about her her family, personal life before she came to San Diego. So she threw this bombshell on me, but honestly at the time, it didn't feel very real, and we were very focused on how do we help navigate this end of life with Nancy, but she was serious. So she passed away a few weeks later, and she had one living relative, her sister, who took her wishes very seriously. So her sister and I worked to set up the legal structure of the foundation in the fall after she passed away in 21, but didn't really get it going until about a year and a half later.
Now, was it a foundation or a fund?
It's a foundation.
Okay. So
Yes.
how did the fund come out of the foundation?
Great question. So she named it the
Okay.
Nancy Nefson and Wetmore Family Foundation.
Okay.
Kind of a long
Yeah.
phrase to say. And family foundations are typically run by families,
Yeah.
but she really handed this to me. And so it wasn't going to be operating as a typical family foundation. And also, I wanted a name that more closely resonated with what I was hoping to do. And so the Kinship Fund is a very intentional name. And I'll have to say, I took this idea from Father Greg Boyle at Homeboy Industries. He's someone that I've always admired. And he talks about...
He's up in LA right now.
He is. He's
Yeah.
in LA, and he just has worldwide impact with the work he does with gangs.
Yes, he
And
does.
I've read a lot of his books and very touched by what he does. And he talks about when we're out there to help people, in quotes, then it's still all about me. But if we're willing to walk in mutuality with folks, then that's where true kinship is born. And that really resonated with me because I had spent a decade leading a nonprofit. And honestly, I did not want to be like some of the foundation folks I had to interact with. I wanted to be relational. I wanted it to be different. I wanted to be in partnership. And so I very intentionally launched it with that name to try to communicate this is something a little bit different.
Wow, that is a story. Nick, I'm telling
That's
you right.
a wild ride right there.
That
Yeah.
is a wild ride. We're chatting with Kim Berry Jones. She's president of the Kinship Fund. I'm Drew Schlosberg of Cloudcast Media, joined by my co-host, Nick Rennell, adjunct faculty for AMU, talking all about the funds and all that. That is a great story. Now, the foundation, is it working in collaboration with the Kinship Fund, or is it? How does that work?
Well, basically, the Kinship Fund is like a DBA. We're doing business as.
Got
So
it.
that
Okay.
it is one
is
and
the
the same
foundation,
thing.
yeah.
Exactly.
Right. But was it in her wishes to focus on women and girls more so than the whole world? So to speak?
Right. Yes. So basically, what she told me was, I know what you care about. You're smart. You figure it out. But I really wanted to do something in line with who she was. And Nancy was one of the early feminists. She actually left her family in Tucson, one of the first people, probably only person to ever fly the nest like she did. And she came as a very young woman to San Diego. She worked as a civilian in the Navy. Very intelligent woman, very independent woman, and lived her life as a single independent woman, really outside of the scope of her family. And so I knew those things that she cared about. And so I really used my friendship with her and relationship with her as a filter for the kinds of things that I think that would matter to her. And so that's what originally launched this scope of women and girls. And then as we have grown, we've really narrowed down on, with our resources, how can we help move the needle? And to do that, we got really focused on our two projects.
Yeah, Nick has a question for you before he gets into it. Was it your work with trafficking that got to focus on the women and girls aspect of it, or not necessarily?
Well, yes and no. I think she didn't indicate to me that she wanted me to necessarily continue down that road with anti-trafficking work, although
Right.
she would have been fine with that.
Right.
It was her feminism, and then I think my exposure to the issues of trafficking in our community that gave me the idea. But honestly, the two focus areas that we landed on are very similar. They have a very similar origin. And it came out of my experience leading a nonprofit and the lack of collaboration that I felt in that sphere. It's so difficult to collaborate with others because you've got your head down trying to keep your doors open, which was the case for me. And so I decided, as a funder, perhaps we could facilitate looking at this a little differently by standing alongside nonprofits and helping them work together. So the two projects have the same sort of central theme, but different areas of focus. But they revolve around this idea of how can we, as philanthropy and funders, help nonprofits work together and collaborate.
You know, it's funny you say that. That's how we started the show 20 years ago.
Really?
It was called Internet Radio, yes. And the whole focus was, when I started this with the Union Tribune, it was one of many shows the UT did, was I want to focus on collaboration. And every question I ask, and I still do to this point 20 years later, is how do you collaborate? Who do you work with? Because if you live in a silo, you're going to die in that silo. That's how it's been. So it's always been an interest of ours at the Union Tribune, and me personally, is that how are you working together? We all know the dollar is shrinking a little bit when it comes to philanthropy and all that aspect of it. 1 + 1 does equal 4 in this. And you're absolutely right. Listen, it's tough for some people to give up some of their space and all that aspect of it. But when the ones who really think creatively, as you know, preaching in the congregation here, can really extend that. So I want to talk about some of the other nonprofits you're working with. But Nick has a question for you.
Yeah, Kim. So everybody wants to know how their money's being spent, especially when they give year after year. How does that work out for funders and multi-year donations?
That's a great question. So, like I said, I came with this perspective of leading a nonprofit, and that's a unique perspective in philanthropy. There are folks that come from that background, but I found it to be unique because when you've run a nonprofit, you have a very different purview on what it looks like to hustle, to keep your doors open, to keep your programs running. And that hustle involves working with foundations. And so one of the things that I found out originally, because when I started, I honestly mostly just knew what I didn't want to be like and what I didn't want to do. That was kind of my baseline. And so I started to look across the community and outside of San Diego, across the nation, at folks who were really doing this work in an innovative way. And what I found was this idea of building relationships on trust, so trust-based philanthropy, which looks at multi-year funding and unrestricted funding, two things that nonprofit leaders rarely get with a grant. Usually you're contorting yourself to fit inside of the box of whatever the grant fund is for. But when you lead with relationship and with trust, then you can give the money to the organizational leaders who actually know what work needs to be done. And it's something that I feel really strongly about, is pushing back on this idea that because we hold the funding, we know we also hold the power, but we don't hold the answers necessarily. It's the folks on the front lines doing the work, the grassroots organizations, that I see really leading with innovation, and what they need is the freedom to do that. And so unrestricted multi-year funding is letting them go and letting their brilliance work in the community. And I have seen such an impact on that relational trust, but it's really pretty unique. I found in San Diego, there's not a lot of that going on.
So I've just got to add to this over here. I've been involved with nonprofits, literally for 42 years now. And finally, to the point you're talking about, funders are understanding that, you know what, good nonprofits need unrestricted money. They have to have operating dollars to run. And those who are unsophisticated go, that's good, I'm giving you $15,000 and I want you to execute $15,000. It's going to cost you $20,000 to execute the $15,000. You'll be you'll be down $5,000 when you're done. And so, one of the many organizations I've been honored to work with, Classroom of the Future Foundation, we say, hey, enough of that. If you want us to do X, Y, and Z, at minimum, it's going to go this to admin. But when you say it's not going to take much administrative work, we know that that's not true. And then we're going to add money to this in that aspect so we can actually execute it. I'm glad to hear that people are really getting it. I know Mackenzie Scott, who has given quite a bit of money to some of the folks that we work with, Meals on Wheels, and then gave a $16 million grant to Dr. Luis Rankin-Zabara at Escondido Union School District to focus on his Learner Collaborative Initiative, which is really spot on. The fact is, no, we trust you guys. You guys have done a great job. We've studied how you spend your money. Knock yourself out. You're not going to give yourself a $16 million raise tomorrow. We know that aspect of it. So I think that's, that is spot on in that aspect of it. When we come back from break, we're going to continue more talking about that aspect of it, unrestricted funds, and maybe some of the groups that you've benefited from that. I think you mentioned there was 9 nonprofits you work with or something to that effect. We'll talk more about that. And we always save some time, as Nick knows, in the second half of the interview, what can our listeners do to support the Kinship Fund? When we return with Kim Berry-Jones, president of the Kinship Fund. I'm Drew Schlosberg of Cloudcast Media, listening to another edition of Drew Schlosberg's Spotlight on the Community Show. We are the nation's longest-running community podcast in our 20th year, brought to you by the fine folks of Mission Fed Credit Union, who for 60-plus years are just doing wonderful things in San Diego County. And we'll be right back with Kim Jones after this short break.
When you do your banking with Mission Fed, you get great rates on auto and home loans. That's good for you, but something good also happens for a lot of other people. We're not for profit, so we put money back into the community to help lots of great nonprofits to keep San Diego strong. So you're not just getting something good, you're doing something good. Come to Mission Fed. It's banking that's good for all.
Brand amplification is the DNA of Cloudcast Media, and our code is the powerful blending of sound, voice, and storytelling to lift local brands and their communities. Whether it is our Brandcast, Schoolcast, or Causecast platforms, the unifying ethos is all about this community, the one you call home. If you dare to dream and want to explore the brand amplification of Cloudcast, a national leader in local podcasting and other Winfluence strategies, please visit us at cloudcast.us.
I'm Drew Schlosberg of Cloudcast Media, and we're going to be chatting for more with Kim Jones, president of the Kinship Fund, joined by my co-host, Nick Rennell. He is the adjunct faculty member at American Military University. So who are some of the nonprofits you work with?
So like I mentioned, we have two projects. So the first one is in El Cajon, and how that came to be is we had given a small mini grant to the Good Shepherd Ministry Center, which is actually an old Methodist church where the population had declined. And so the denomination, rather than selling it off, decided they would allow a group to start a ministry there. And so it is a food bank. It's a really innovative model. And I had been there to visit after we'd given them a grant. And I saw that they were renting out space to other nonprofits for below market value. And so I walked away and thought, what if we got them together, because they all served the same population, but none of them knew each other, none of them were talking. So I approached Susan at Good Shepherd and said, I have this idea. What if we came alongside you with funding, but also with strategic support, and helped you start to sit down and talk about how you could better reach the community in the neighborhood around which you serve? And so the first year, funded 3 of them. We paid their rent, which was one of the things we did, along with programmatic funding. So we took that rent burden off of them. And then they started to gather together and talk about how they could partner. And so we've been helping them identify other organizations in the community that could work with them, and then also bringing in new organizations to the building. And then the other partnership, which I'm really excited about and have a great example of collaboration I'd love to share with you, is our Youth Mentorship Collaborative. That one has 9 nonprofits in it. And again, same idea. I like to say, I feel like I have the balcony seat of an orchestra playing. So the orchestra's down there doing all the work. They're making the music. I'm not. I'm watching it. But I can see these connections and these possibilities differently than they can, because they're down there working on their individual instrument and playing their music. And so I saw the same thing with the Youth Mentor folks. They knew each other, but they weren't collaborating. And I tell you what, when a funder says, we want you to collaborate, you just roll your eyes as a nonprofit, because what does that mean? And exactly like you mentioned, it's not ever resourced. So instead we said, we want to form this collaborative. We want to build with you a roadmap for what that looks like. And so the first thing we did, and this great example of the beautiful organic things coming out of it, is we started to hold space for these people. And it's called the Kinship Third Space. And it's really well-being focused, which is a whole nother story about my passion for nonprofit leaders' well-being. But what happened is they started to build relationship, and there were 2 organizations, Youth Empowerment and Epiphany Women in Focus, both who've been in the same area, City Heights, Logan area, doing the work, quietly doing the work for years, knew each other, but honestly didn't have the right amount of trust to really work together. And so because we started holding space for them, one day they decided that they were going to go for a contract with the county together. And this is a contract they probably could not have gotten themselves. In fact, I'm sure they couldn't have. But they did something innovative and they applied for it together and they won a $1.5 million contract. And now they're leading restorative justice circles, restorative practices inside of juvenile probation. And that's not anything I'm going to take credit for, except for the fact that we held space. And that's what I'm talking about, is that's something funders don't always take the time to do, is help nonprofit leaders imagine what it could look like to work together and then bring along the advocacy and the strategy and the support along with the funding to make it happen.
Yeah, and I think, Nick, that's so critical in this world. And we know the one person that is helped by this type of collaboration is not just one. It's their whole scope. It's
right.
Their family, it's their colleagues, it's all the tentacles that are there, and that's the beauty of this type of collaboration in this aspect of it. I know Nick's got a question for you also.
Kim, what's the biggest challenge you focus as a funder right now?
Oh, wow. The first thing I thought, I have to be honest, after raising money for a decade for a nonprofit, and I had to raise all the money. It was the nonprofit was the Center for Justice and Reconciliation. It was a Point Loma Nazarene, but we had to raise almost all of the money. We meaning me. And so when I moved to this place, honestly, the first thing I thought was, oh my God, thank God I don't have to raise money anymore. But because we have an endowment and we grant off of that, the proceeds of investing in that endowment. But my ideas, which is typical of me, are bigger than my pocketbook. So one of the biggest challenges is finding more resources, which I originally thought, well, that means I got to go out and hustle like the old days and raise money. But what I'm finding is there are other ways to bring about resources. The example of the contract. $1.5 million is more than we could have given them, easily a lot more than we could have given them. And yet that is part of our work. So I'm also starting to talk with and work with other funders about how we could work together and support efforts. That's a new idea in San Diego. It's happening. It's happening on a big level, but I am pitching and talking to funders who are starting to look at models that are unusual and haven't been done yet in San Diego. And that is, again, like, let's think outside the box. We know it's not working the way we've been doing it, the way philanthropy has been operating, and we know nonprofits are struggling. So how can we as funders leverage the influence, the relationships and the resources we have to make nonprofits more successful?
Yeah, and depending on what number you're looking at and all that, it varies. There's 10,000 nonprofits to 15,000 nonprofits to which roll the dice and say, today it's going to be 13,000.
Yeah.
Tomorrow it's 14,900 and all that.
Yep.
And all that business. I don't mean to make fun of it. We work really closely with the USD School of Leadership and Ed Sciences and the Nonprofit Institute you're familiar with as well. Mm-hmm. But the overwhelming majority, Nick, of nonprofits, barely make their own budgets in this aspect of it, but are just doing unbelievable work in this space. So what you're talking about is so critical. And as we get more folks to understand that, yes, unrestricted money is really important for those nonprofits, there's going to be some challenges ahead. We know there are things that are out of the control of a lot of the people, and as they've been cutting budgets, some very important budgets back east that have some impact down here. It makes it even more important for the Kinship Fund and the groups that you work with. Do you think you'll ever see yourself, it's not that you're exclusively with women and girls, but do you ever see you expanding that mission? Hard to say. Yeah,
great question, because our mission is clearly women and girls, but if you look at the nonprofits we work with, they're across everything. So, for example, youth empowerment, they work with men and women, boys and girls. So they're working with justice-involved youth and folks that are coming out of the system. So we don't fund just exclusively around that. It's a nod to who Nancy was, but what we are definitely doing is letting this evolve through the relationships. So I couldn't have even guessed 6 months ago, even what was happening right now in the juvenile justice reform space and our place in it. And it's been really interesting because we sit at the table with grassroots organizations that are focused on juvenile justice reform, and we're most often the only funder there. And so that gives us a level of positionality, proximity that I think is really important for us to talk about. What that means is, why are we the only funder at those tables? And then how do we bring more funders closer to the situation to actually understand how things like youth mentorship can impact juvenile justice?
Do you work at JCCS at all?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So one of our close friends is this assistant superintendent in charge of that, Joseph Clevenger. And of course we work with the Classroom of the Future Foundation, as Nick is aware. He's been to a couple of our events. We work with all 43 school districts, and JCCS has been around for quite a while, of course, and does some great work. Do you work in any of the space of careers and pathways, not just with women and girls, but just in general?
Yeah, I think we think about it from a position of upward mobility. So we're looking at that right now with workforce development, and this is specifically around the part of the work with juvenile justice reform. So you probably know we've got some investigations going on right now with our probation department, and specifically what's happening with youth in detention. And so we're a big part of the community advocacy that's going on right now in the county. And a pathway, a workforce development pathway, is so important. So some of our nonprofits, that is their focus. We have kind of two buckets in our youth mentorship. One is very academic focused, career and technical pathway focused, and one is more emotional support and re-entry support, but there's also a workforce development arm in that. So I think across all of our nonprofits, that's threaded through, and it's critical because we have to give youth opportunity beyond the typical college route and help them look at all the different opportunities. So,
well, It sounds like, Nick, that we need to get involved with Classroom of the Future Foundation. What do you
Sounds
think?
like it for sure. Yeah.
No, it seems like a match made in heaven on that. So what can our Spotlight on the Community listeners do to continue to support the great work you're doing?
Couple things. I think my biggest ask right now would be, let's step back and think about how can we imagine doing this differently. So I represent a small foundation. We don't have the dollar power that some of the larger foundations in town have, and I love what I'm seeing them do when they're starting to collaborate, they're starting to look at multi-year funding. And yet, we are inside of a system. Philanthropy is a system just like all others. It's designed to do exactly what it's doing. And sometimes that looks like hoarding wealth. And so I want to call folks to reimagine. When you look at the impact of what our small foundation is doing with a small group of small nonprofits, it is way outsized. We're punching above our weight. And I think it's precisely because we look at it as a partnership, not as a benevolence towards these nonprofits, but truly like we're honored to walk alongside them. And when we're willing to do that beyond the check with other types of support, what can happen is more than you can imagine. And we're seeing that happen in San Diego in ways that are so incredibly exciting, ultimately for the benefit of the youth in our community.
Yeah, there's no question about that. What's the website where people can get a hold of
it? It is, yes, kinshipfund.com.
Yeah, so listen, we would love to have you come back and maybe bring in some of the nonprofits that you worked with.
Oh, that'd be great.
And then they can shine a light on how it's worked with the Kinship, and obviously be good role models for other nonprofits that don't think they can sit there and do the same thing. So let's make that happen. How's that sound?
I'd love that. Thank you.
Absolutely. We've been chatting with Kim Berry-Jones, president of the Kinship Fund. I'm Drew Schlosberg of Cloudcast Media, listening to another edition of Drew Schlosberg Spotlight on the Community Show, nation's longest running community podcast, brought to you by Mission Fed Credit Union. More than 60 years of doing great things in the community. And once again, Nick Rennell, adjunct faculty for American Military University. No surprise, but you're always on your game.
Oh, thanks, Drew. I try.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, we hope you enjoyed the interview.
You've been listening to an episode of Drew Schlosberg's Spotlight on the Community Show, amplifying the voices of social impact organizations, entrepreneurs, local nonprofits, and other community champions who shape the culture, creativity, and connectivity of San Diego community. Brought to you by Mission Fed Credit Union, bringing good things to San Diego for over 60 years. Learn more about what is good for you and good for all by visiting www.missionfed.com.